Wonderful. So welcome and thank you for joining us for this virtual talk featuring Professor Marie T. Cochran. My name is Kristen Evangelista and I'm the director of the William Paterson University Galleries. Today, Professor Cochran is going to be speaking with us about her art and social justice, drawing upon her background in the arts and culture of Black Appalachia. First, I would like to outline the format for today's presentation. I'm going to briefly introduce Professor Cochran. She will discuss her artwork and show us a few short videos and engage in a discussion with my colleague who's here, Yolani Gonell, the director of the Center for Diversity and Inclusion and the Black Cultural Center. The audience will have time to ask questions using the chat. I think we decided they could ask questions during the talk as well as at the conclusion. So please feel free to share your thoughts, your affirmations in the chat, and Yolani will share them with Marie and everyone. We just ask the audience members to remain muted, and if you do want to speak, you can raise your hand in the Zoom. This is a virtual program that's going to be recorded, as Yolani mentioned, and it will be available to view on the gallery's website and the university's website in the near future. I would like to thank all those who made this event possible. I'm grateful to Professor Cochran for preparing this insightful talk, for sharing her vision and her creativity with us to inspire us. This event was realized with the support of the staff of the Center for Diversity and Inclusion, as well as the staff of the University Galleries. And we are so excited to be partnering on this event in recognition of the university's celebration of Black History Month. So now I would like to introduce our speaker. Born and raised in Toccoa, Georgia, in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains, Professor Marie T. Cochran is an artist, educator, and writer. She earned a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree from the University of Georgia and a Master's of Fine Arts from the School of the Art Institute of Chicago. She also received a postgraduate NEA fellowship in museum education at the Art Institute. As a visual artist, she creates mixed media pieces that address community history and are also grounded in interdisciplinary dialogues focused on social justice. She is exhibited extensively throughout the Southeast and nationally at the High Museum of Art, the Lyndon Johnson Presidential Library Museum, the Smithsonian Institute, and the Studio Museum in Harlem, among others. Her work was included in the 2019 exhibition, Appalachia Now, as part of the inaugural reopening of the Asheville Art Museum in North Carolina. She was one of 3 lead artists who realized the Black Lives Matter street mural in Asheville, North Carolina, this past summer in 2020, and she will be speaking about that today. Cochran is the founding curator of the Appalachian Artist Project and has been an art faculty member at educational institutions in Georgia, Maryland, North Carolina, and even New Jersey. As the Lehman Brady Professor, she continues her work as a social practice artist while teaching courses in a dual role at the Duke University's Center for Documentary Studies and the American Studies Department at the University of North Carolina. Cochran's awards include a Georgia Council for the Art Individual Artist Grant, Mid-Atlantic Arts Council Artist as Catalyst Grant, NEA Southern Arts Federation Sculpture Fellowship, NEA Fast Track Challenge Grant, and a grant from the We Shall Overcome Fund. In addition, she has served on peer grant review panels for the Georgia Council for the Arts, the Mid-Atlantic Arts Council, and the Center for Craft. Quoting poet and writer Nikki Giovanni, she believes that we cannot possibly leave it to history as a discipline, nor to sociology, nor science, nor economics to tell the story of our people. So thank you very much, Professor Cochran, for being with us today.
Well, thank you for that wonderful introduction. I think you said it's snow there. It's 57 degrees here in Northeast Georgia. So I I feel already a little bit of warmth, but a little bit of wonderful exhilaration in the contrast of the weather in our different locations. First of all, I really want to thank my colleague, Yolani Gunnell, for the invitation. We had worked together before in these mountains in Western North Carolina. And we'd always talked about being able to collaborate at some point. And I'm so glad that she's touched back base with her roots. And I'm still here toiling and doing my work. So it's a wonderful opportunity for our first collaboration after having made that vow a couple of years ago. So glad to be here.
Well, Marie, we are thrilled that you have joined us, as Kristen had mentioned earlier in the introduction. And as we get ready to kick off this dialogue and interactive presentation, our first question is really about art and activism in Appalachia. And I'd love for you to start your story and tell us about your journey and defining what is Appalachia. And as we think of that Appalachia, how is art a form of activism?
Well, first of all, the term is something that you will learn a lot more about in the first video. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to include it, because you don't just see me again on screen and hear me talk. You see the actual people and places, a little bit of the places, but mainly the artwork from an exhibition that I curated that was in Pittsburgh. This is the 10th anniversary of the Appalachian Artist Project. Wow. So it began for me in a real way with that curated exhibition at the August Wilson Center in Pittsburgh, because Pittsburgh is right there near West Virginia, which everybody already has a sense of as being connected to the region, but it's urban Appalachia. The term itself, and the video will elaborate, was invented by a group of Kentucky poets 30 years ago. So I essentially found a word that described my experience of being born and raised in Georgia, but not being from Atlanta, not being from what we often refer to as a chocolate city where there's a large African-American population, but still very rooted in the fact that I'm a person of African descent, but also very much proud of the fact that there are these three different streams that run through my life and my identity of Indigenous people and also of white people. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, but I think it's probably best if we start with the video and then we can come back.
Great.
We're all here because of the fact that we are undervalued, you know, as artists, and we're always looked up. We're secondary.
We're told that we would best suit our talents to become pipe fitters or something more practical. And this was it was a white professor that told us that.
She said, honey, colored people can't be artists.
Just having that kind of support within the family unit made it so that when I experienced opposition from outside, I already had the armor I needed to deflect that.
In the 5th grade in Miss Trophy's class, when we had to stand up and say what we wanted to be when we grew up, I took that challenge and I stood up and said I wanted to be an artist when I grow up. So all the kids at recess, I told them I couldn't play with them anymore because I could only play with people who believe in me.
I've always been a creative person, but never really had a chance to really express myself. Something like being there, you know, people really don't have that big of appreciation for artists.
My name is Marie Cochran, and I was born and raised in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. I am an Appalachian artist. 20 years ago, a group of writers, Black writers from Kentucky, coined the term Appalachia. 2 years ago at a gathering, it occurred to me that musical groups like the Carolina Chocolate Drops had embraced the term. There was a word, there was a song, but where were the visual artists? Frank X. Walker, a founding member of the Appalachian Poets, extended his hand across the table and he said, "You invite them." And that was when my journey began. 2 years later, I've curated an exhibition of Appalachian artists at the August Wilson Center in Pittsburgh. The name of the show is Common Ground Appalachia, where I'm from. This particular exhibition brings together 31 artists of various ages working in a variety of media. Appalachia identifies the African presence in these mountains. For too long, the contribution of African Americans to American culture has been neglected. Until recently, our contribution to Appalachian culture has been denied. For instance, how many folks know that the banjo, which is so integral to Appalachian music, has African roots? The Appalachian Visual Artists Project was created to showcase the artwork. The exhibition represents the completion of the first phase. In the next phase, I feel a sense of urgency. Many of the artists are over the age of 60.
Oh, my name is Mayota Hill.
Green Davis, Willis Green Davis.
Nima Jackson.
I'm looking at Paul Ramey. I am Elizabeth Ash Douglas.
I'm Errol Butchie Mobutu Reynolds.
Charlotte Ka.
My name is Joanne Bates.
Valeria Watson Deuce.
My name is Sammy Lewis Nicely.
How do you feel about being a part of this exhibition with all of us here?
Honored because they're pioneers. We felt so isolated at the time. We didn't know of Bean Davis. We didn't know people were, especially African American artists. We saw Mr. Davis at a conference in Texas. And I thought, wow, we're not the only ones. There's somebody out there in the world that's living, thriving as an artist.
They are the pioneers who have overcome racial prejudice and other barriers. It's time to give these artists the recognition that they so richly deserve.
And it makes us feel like, wow, there's somebody out there that we can look up to, and pretty soon we're gonna have to pass that baton on to someone else. I didn't make it by myself. I had other people that supported us along the way.
I need your support to take this next step so that I, along with my team, can travel to the places where these artists live and work to capture their life story. This will begin the process of creating an archive of Appalachian artists. Do you agree that African American cultural traditions or contributions are undervalued? Are you surprised to learn about the rich literary, musical, and visual arts traditions in Appalachia? If you answer yes to any of these questions, then you owe it to yourself to make a pledge. I thank you on behalf of all the future generations of Appalachian artists. All right. Okay, we can stop right there. Yes. So I'm guessing that there may be questions about that video. If there are any right now, I'm more than ready to answer before we keep going.
Okay.
I know that, as I said earlier, people may not expect us to be in all of these different places, but yes, we are in the Appalachian Mountains and the Appalachian region.
And maybe as we give our participants an opportunity to submit their questions in the Q&A, where exactly is the region of Appalachia? What states are included in that region?
Well, I am thinking that there's going to be a map a little bit later, so you'll actually be able to see what I'm describing. But
Okay.
as we, in my teacher, no, you don't have to advance yet because I can give you a quick explanation. First of all, it was something that was created. When we talk about American history, very often we need to ask ourselves, where do these things come from? And Appalachia was created in the 1960s in an effort to give support for a region that was impoverished, that was rich in land. And you've probably heard about the Appalachian Trail and these beautiful mountains and the leaves that change in this incredible color flurry in autumn. But it was drawn around specifically the area of West Virginia, and it grows out from there like ripples in a stream all the way out as far as areas of Alabama, and I think a few counties in Mississippi, all the way up to areas in Ohio, Pennsylvania. So you'll see the sign.
Great, and thank you for that.
You'll see the map.
As we begin to conceptualize this work, and I see here we have a hand raised. Javier, we're going to open your mic if you wanted to ask your question directly.
Yeah, sure.
Hello, Javier.
Hello.
What's your question?
Oh no, I didn't have any question. I just saw that I had the hand up.
Okay.
We just know that you're present and accounted for. But I can slip something else in really quickly.
Sure.
When you do the math, I created that video 10 years ago, right after the exhibition had opened. So when it says that the group of Kentucky poets created it, the word, it was 1991. So
Wow.
now 30 years ago. So what happened is that they had been living and working in Kentucky and found themselves in the audience of an event about Appalachian writers. And nobody in their group was on stage.
Wow.
And they said, wait a minute, we're here. People know that we're writers. People know that we're teachers. And they went to the dictionary and they opened up the dictionary, and it said at the time, the white residents of the mountainous regions of southeast and portions of northern part of the United States, something along those lines. It specifically said white.
Wow.
Because again, you probably just learned that the banjo has African roots. You probably didn't realize, but that wonderful, strumming in the background of the video was by the Carolina Chocolate Drops, a group of Black musicians who won a Grammy Award for old time music. So all of these things were brought together when that group of poets decided that they were going to invent a word. And now you can look it up and it is in the dictionary. Now, even when you look up the word Appalachian, it doesn't say white only anymore, even though the stereotype might still remain.
And and I think that leads us to the second part of the question of how is art a form of activism, right? And even a sign of resistance. And so as we hear that counter narrative of, wow, like we are being erased from this body of work, from our existence, how does that connect to this next video here?
Great lead in, because it also tells us that we can create our own narratives.
Mm-hmm.
And as you said, in this particular case, it's not even a counter narrative. It revised this sense of what the region is. And let me drop my things that I always drop in there. August Wilson would be defined as Appalachian. Nina Simone, whose birthday was just yesterday, Appalachian. Bill Withers, T.D. Jakes from West Virginia, the Carter G. Woodson, who created Black Negro History Week, which we now call Black History Month. And these are all people of color who are from areas where they were not the majority.
Right.
So when we make this next transition, I specifically picked this out of all the work I've done because Yolani was getting on my case about how I could have done a lot more to give you an overview of my career, but I wanted to just bring it to present day and also to continue to try to break those stereotypes because Asheville, North Carolina, Blue Ridge Parkway, Appalachian Trail, all these different things that we think of with this land and tourism and all these other aspects of the, attractions to the region was part of this national dialogue that became a part of Black Lives Matter. And so I'm showing you the documentation of other murals throughout the city in Asheville, and then it ends up with the Asheville street mural that I worked on with a team of artists. And that's what I'm going to really concentrate on in the talk today.
Excellent. So let's play the video and then we'll continue our conversation.
And keep those questions so we can share.
From musicians and painters to photographers and sculptors, artists are driven to create art as a marker of a moment in time. The Asheville Symphony, with support from the Asheville Art Museum and the Asheville Area Arts Council, has captured this moment in our city's history.
on me, sorry.
From music.
Sorry about that, guys. We'll stop it here. We do see a question on our panel. And Marie, here's the first question. From a student, I'm still learning how art from the Black diaspora as a whole is not commonly curated or even represented correctly in education. As much as I feel like I don't need white validation, how do we demand the proper equity when it comes to our art being represented or even taught to us correctly? Great question. Thank you, Dante. And so Marie, we'll need to turn your mic back on.
Oh, I just got all exuberant. First of all, I was going to say that I really am looking forward to getting the name of that student because that's a perfect question.
Dante.
Dante. Even before I answer Dante's question, I want to bring to your attention something that I just thought about today. The background music for the first video was by the Carolina Chocolate Drops. All African-American string band group that won a Grammy in the early 2000s. The music that you just heard is also by an African-American composer, George Walker. They didn't identify him as such, but it was really important for the Asheville Symphony to do something that they've never done before, and to foreground a Black composer who lived 1922 to 2018. But if we don't acknowledge the identity of these artists, writers, etc., scientists included, then we don't have that wealth of information that tells us about the dynamic span of styles and approaches. So that's the first thing, is many of us often kind of laugh about the fact that there are all of these people who come before us, and you'll find out that somebody is not the first, the Black first, because there have been others. And either they were recognized to a certain degree during their time and their identity wasn't carried forth with them, or they just did not get the acclaim. So going back to the question, we don't need validation from a particular group of people, but we need to be in the canon. We don't need to be a particular kind of anything, but even as I hear some of my very few, but people that I know say, well, race is not an important factor to that. I just want to be an artist. But being African American, being of African descent is a universe all to itself. It is not a negative. It is not something that should be put aside. I feel as if we have all kinds of hats that we wear and things that we bring to the table. And I do believe that each individual will decide to what extent they want to bring those things forward, but I don't think that we should run away from them. So the struggle continues, but part of what we've seen, as difficult as it's been in the last 5 years alone, or at the very least, since we've started to not just use the word racism, but talk about white privilege and white supremacy, we acknowledge the fact that cultural value has been given to certain groups of people and denied other groups of people.
Excellent.
So I hope that answers your question. But the way to get there, that's why I want to follow up with you, because I think there's specific strategies that we can look to, and it's through activism.
Right. And just to add to that, if we think about what is William Paterson University doing to address the question, right? We know that Professor Alejandro Anres is teaching a course on African American art in the fall of 2021. And more information should be available in the next catalog. And so thank you, Kristen, for sharing that tidbit of information. Okay. Marie, I'm going to advance to the next slide. And in this next, and we encourage students to continue to use the Q&A function on the presentation to engage with us and to engage with Marie. Talk to us about these upcoming slides. I think there's information here that you wanted to share with us, and then I'll continue to advance them as you request.
Okay. I think we might need to go, I can't remember what my eyes were seeing. Go back one, just for 1 second. Okay, all right. I just wanted to give a shout out to the other artists who are part of this project. This was a selected, a curated art piece, because I have to say that a lot of the Black Lives Matter murals, street murals, very often came spontaneous. And the mother of them all, I'll talk about in just a minute, that was in Washington, D.C. that started them all. But in this particular case, it was very intentional. And this was sponsored by Councilwoman Shanika Smith. You see her name at the very bottom of the list of credits. And she had a call for artists. And I'll talk a little bit more about it because I want to really get to the slides. I'm looking at the time and I want to be able to spend time there. But I think it's important to say that when we talk about activism and strategy, a lot of the artists that you saw, their work in the street art, various storefronts and whatnot, were a variety of identities and ethnicities and everything that you could think of and how to categorize people. And it became a little bit of a controversy, but I'll just say it worked itself out. When Councilwoman Smith was very defiant and very intentional by saying that she wanted as many artists of color as possible, and specifically artists of African descent, to be able to create this mural. And so it was a point where this other artists had to take a step back. And the first question that was really interesting, when you talk about those of us who may be, we're creative, might tend to be seen as liberal or having a particular political or mindset, it really shined a light on issues that had not been discussed before. And one of the questions from the group of artists, as they were saying, you know, why are you making those stipulations? So they were saying, well, are there enough artists to do this street mural? By forcing that issue and leading in that way, Councilwoman Smith was able to prove a point. So I think you get what I'm saying. So we'll go for
right. And you know, I'm so glad that you shared that context, because one of the comments that we received here from Sherry is that, one, she wanted to acknowledge that the artistry was amazing, right? Exclamation point.
Right.
And just word for word, I'm going to read her comment here. The still art matched perfectly with the audio, as well as the pics strategically placed in order. I loved how the people in the pictures moving across the art spoke to the audience as well. And this is in reference to the video that we just what we shared. And then here's the comment that kind of goes right into what you just explained in terms of the context. She says, I saw that life is swiftly moving on as if nothing has happened. And for these Black lives, things have slowed down, stopped, and it seems to have gone back to how hate used to be bold. Wow. And it takes us to the next slide, if you will. Yeah.
Right. That's perfect. Listen to the story of how people showed their power,
right,
and how they responded in such an unexpected and spontaneous way. So I put this on the screen so that I don't forget all the details, but this entire art movement, because other artists were doing their own thing as a response right when people were shot down, right when the news was, you know, accounting for all of these names from Trayvon Martin way back. Artists have responded, but the movement took place as a result of what happened in Washington, D.C. in June. African-American Mayor Muriel Bowser announced that she'd renamed the section of 16th Street in front of the White House as Black Lives Matter Plaza as a rebuke to then President Donald Trump after he had ordered authorities to forcibly clear peaceful protesters from Lafayette Square for a photo op outside of St. John's Episcopal Church. So the story hasn't been told yet, and I'm looking for it, but nobody, and it will be one of those historic things, just like the March on Washington, just like the protest in Montgomery, the Montgomery bus boycott, where some folks got in a room and said to themselves, how can we respond in a defiant but life-affirming way? And they came up with the idea to create art. So overnight, a team of city workers painted the first major Black Lives Matter mural leading up to the White House. And as I said before in the text, Mayor Bowser proclaimed it, renamed Black Lives Matter Plaza. So let's look at some photos. And you guys probably remember this. So this is something I pulled right off of somebody's, Twitter / Instagram page. I can't remember what to call it anyway. So there's the sign. I'm a Facebook old school person. There's the sign. I love this montage though, because you see the sign, you see the mural. And like I said before, these were not artists. These were city workers. And that bold yellow, the highway paint, they made use of what they had already. They realized that it was a way that they could make themselves seen. And next slide, I think you can see one of the aerial views. It could be seen from space. Yeah. It was so large. And then from there were murals coming up everywhere. And this is the photograph that I love so much, because what seems to be a very unassuming man, looks like her daddy or somebody, standing next to Mayor Bowser. You see the people starting to congregate, because there were all types of festival-like activities and dancing and revelry to almost reclaim from those people who'd been tear gassed with helicopters and had been arrested for doing nothing other than protesting. And here we go to the next slide. And there she stands with my hero, the late Congressman John Lewis. And as I said before, this was one of his final public appearances before his death. So here you have a young mayor of the city that's the capital of the United States, next to a man who's one of the civil rights icons, who at the age of 22 was the youngest speaker at the March on Washington with Martin Luther King, right, who crossed the Edmund Pettus Bridge, but almost lost his life with his skull fractured, arrested many times, a member of SNCC, but as a man at 80, still able to see the next generation of activists and the next version of the freedom struggle. Next slide. So here's that map I told you about. And I will be putting dots on the map later. I just didn't have the time, but I wanted you to see at least a selection of the Black Lives Matter marches and rallies in Appalachia. And now you can see all through Mississippi, Alabama, Northeast Georgia, the little notch up on the right is where I am as we speak. South Carolina, upstate, East Tennessee, Western North Carolina, where Yolani Gunnell and I worked together at the college where we were at the time. Kentucky, where the word Appalachia was invented. Little bit of Virginia, all of West Virginia, and then portions of Pennsylvania, and then a little bit of north of New York. But all the lists of marches and rallies were taking place in Appalachia. And in this particular case, because of the demographics of those communities, many of those marchers, even in my hometown, which I neglected to put on this map, I just realized, oh yeah, there it is, Toccoa. Many of those marches were Latinx, were Asian American, were white Americans, Euro Americans. Next slide. So I know that probably surprises you, because that's where this comes in. In the same way that these places are changing because of progressive thought, Georgia being the state that really changed the outcome of the presidential election, to everybody's surprise, including my own, there are vestiges of repressive and oppressive forces. And one of those vestiges is very often seen in monuments. So you might not have seen it. They didn't put it in the video about the street mural, but I'll show you in just a minute the fact that the Asheville street mural actually goes around the base of a Confederate memorial. This memorial is the Vance Monument right in the middle of downtown Asheville, North Carolina, 64 feet in height, solid granite. I won't go into detail, but those of you who know anything about art history, it's interesting that this Confederate monument itself is in the style of an Egyptian obelisk, but that's for another day. All right, so anyway, next slide and we'll see the inscription so that you can see who this person is named Vance.
Mm-hmm.
So it was erected, as I said, as a response to Reconstruction and all of the things that would lead towards the liberation of Black people. So this is in honor of Zebulon Baird Vance, Confederate soldier, let me read.
Mm-hmm.
War governor, U.S. senator, orator, and statesman. So all of these things, including a proud member of the Ku Klux Klan.
Mm-hmm.
And so even when the discussion was started about a street mural, like you said, all those other wonderful murals were placed, they came up spontaneously.
Mm-hmm.
Not when Trayvon Martin was shot. Not when Sandra Bland was killed. Not when Ahmaud Arbery was shot. It was George Floyd.
Mm-hmm.
So artists were responding because Asheville prides itself as being a very progressive and liberal, solidly liberal town.
Mm-hmm.
But people began to talk about this elephant in the room, the monument in the middle of the city, and how they could answer to that. And that's how the decision was made to place the mural around the base of the monument. So we can see the next slide. And there you can see again how vast, how massive it is. And the next. So, like I said, you can go, I'll put a link later or I'll at least share a link for the artists so that you can see the other artists involved. Because as I said before, there were 3 of us and we each had a word. Joseph Pearson had Black, Jenny Pickens had lives, and I had the word matter. And we didn't want to sort of cause any kind of, control issues with the imagery. We didn't want to have to sit down and debate. We all had our different styles and approaches, but we all came to a very simple decision that would tie in all the works together. And that's the fact that we would use the palette of red, black, and green.
Marie, we have a few minutes left. We'll continue recording and having the presentation. I know some people may have to tip out of this experience. And so I just wanted to just acknowledge that. As we proceed with the next few slides, one of the big questions that we have here is, as a mixed media artist, how is the use of colors and symbols used throughout your work, right? And so I think you're about to share that with us. And then as you think of that, the symbols that are used throughout the work, can you speak to the values of coalition and community building as a form of activism? And so with that said, I'll go on to the next slide.
Okay. Well, I always say that collaboration is my bliss. I don't know how to work well unless I'm working with others because I'm, vibing off of their work. And so what I also decided to do was to give you a look at the sketches, because a lot of times people look at artwork because we have so many manufactured things that come our way, whether it be from Target or Walmart or Dollar General, wherever. And these were designed by artists. So the thing is, you'll see a lot of street murals where basically people used it like a coloring book because it was just to get people to come together and bring their children, and they're touching it and they're making a mark, and that's significant. But because of the location that we chose and this dialogue that the work had with this Confederate memorial, we each decided how we were going to approach it with imagery. So, and I won't have time to talk about everybody's imagery except my own, but for me, art is always a chance to have, a teachable moment. And people who might not know about certain protests or certain imagery have the opportunity to have that with them. So this is Joseph Pearson's sketch. This is, okay, with black. And you can see the next is Jenny Pearson's design. And you just to show real quick, she even played off of COVID-19. And I can't remember the gentleman in New York, but I Can't Breathe. And so she brought in not only the issue of police brutality, Garner, but also Eric Garner, but also the fact that we were in the midst of the COVID crisis. And it was just a couple of months afterwards, we all, had to wear a mask and, practice safe, precautions. And that was a part of the mural as well. And then next is my sketch for Matter. And because I'll be able to show you the slides up close, I'm just going to let you see the fact that, the actual sketch that had me work out my plan. And I may forget to name names again. So underneath, you can see all of the names because we had artists, lead artists, and then we each were able to recruit young artists as support artists who would do the individual letters. And I want to add this because it's very important. The lead artists were paid, the support artists were paid. So that was a process that gave the project even more integrity as far as I'm concerned. So let's look close. Here we go. That's an overview so that you can see a little bit closer each of the letters. And you can see how lives actually curved around because, as I said before, this is an actual roadway that leads you around the base of the monument. Now we'll look at imagery. Oh yeah, you get to the aerial view. And you can see the black image because they literally decided step by step by step how they were going to address this issue. And the decision was made for the location. The next decision was made for the mural. Following that, they decided that they were going to shroud the monument. So last I checked, it is now obscured from view until they decide what they're going to do with the monument, whether they're going to transform it or remove it. All right, Matter. So Lakeisha Blunt was my artist for this particular letter. And let me just say really quickly, because I know that Yolani doesn't know this, and I'm watching the time too, Yolani. It turned out as the question was raised, how are you going to come up with Black artists from Asheville when we don't know too many Black artists in Asheville? Jenny was known, Joseph was known. And what they didn't realize were there were all of these artists who had a connection to Asheville, to Western North Carolina that they weren't aware of. All of the artists on my team, except for one, and her mother was an alumni, were graduates of Western Carolina University's art department. And all of them, except one who has her own business as an artist, but all of them were teachers. So the interesting thing was that I became aware of a legacy that my own former employer was not aware of. They came through school without having a Black teacher. When I came through as a Black teacher, I didn't have hardly any Black students. So there we go back to that earlier question. We have to create a legacy. We have to find out who came before us. We have to be concerned about the people who come after us. Let me talk about art. So The M, mountain M. So I used the imagery of the landscape. I wanted to have something that was abstracted. And what you can see in that top right corner is something that is a mix between African kente cloth and quilts, because Lakeisha is from far western North Carolina in a rural community called Texan. Next slide. A, so you already know about the African origins of the banjo. So Raki Martin was playing with those forms and bringing that legacy of music into the form. Because, I mean, basically a banjo is a drum with a neck and strings. And all you have to do is look up people like Taj Mahal and others who were aware of this legacy a long, long time ago. And the Carolina Chocolate Drops actually met at an event called the Black Banjo Gathering in Appalachian State University. Mm-hmm. Next slide. If I have a favorite, it's the two T's, because I had two best friends work on this. And let me just say too, these young people, and I had no idea until afterwards, not only came to school and left with a degree in art, but they began as student athletes. Trey Miles and Keela Hunt were both track. That's what they came on that scholarship and ended up being art teachers. So they worked on this together, as well as Keela bringing his 3 children as assistants. And so I created this idea of playing around with the Abeje figures, which are the twin figures, primarily from Nigeria, power figures of twins. You see those images of the faces in the middle. You also have the hands reaching out, but they're brown instead of the traditional of the Sistine Chapel. And then there are images of Adinkra symbols from Ghana. And right there in the middle is a $20 bill. And if we'd gotten a close-up version of it, it is a stylized image of now what we can look forward to coming down the pike is Harriet Tubman as the central figure of the $20 bill. Next slide. The E was an abstracted idea that I gave to the artist, Broderick Flanagan, who's actually an artist from Athens, Georgia, that I brought up, the only out-of-towner. And it's the connection between the railroad as a means of transportation, these images of youth. You see the tennis shoes, the bottom of the feet, another Adinkra symbol that's a Sankofa bird, you know, that you don't go forward unless you look back at your past. But specifically for those railroad forms, it's an acknowledgement that the railroads were built by Black men. And there's a long story about the fact that incarcerated labor was used to build these railroads. And there's an incredible documentary called Slavery by Another Name, which talks about the history of the incarceration of men of various ages, even down to the age of 12 and 15, for things like loitering in order to get free labor after the end of slavery, to build things like the railroads and to, you know, forge through, you know, pioneering through the land and developing. So that's what this image was about. And Broderick is very much concerned in his community in Athens and talking about the school to prison pipeline and things of that nature. So that's why I gave him this letter and that design to play with. And last but not least, the letter R. And this was created by a dear friend, passed away. She was almost like my spiritual mentor, Victoria Casey McDonald's daughter, Faustine McDonald.
Yeah.
So you have the stylized kente, some of that imagery that could almost look like part of a quilt or part of a railroad. But the images along the side and the color itself, red, associated with blood, not only the blood in the streets, but the fact that Faustine is a sickle cell warrior.
Mm-hmm.
So the powerful thing for me was the fact that I was able to assemble all of these young artists together and give them imagery that they had a personal connection to. So next slide. And these are all the artists together. And I'm somewhere back there with a hat on, but I want you to pay special attention to the fact that sitting on the ground is Keela Hunt holding the sign that says Black Lives Matter. And that's one of his children, Jeans, there with his fist raised, that was able to work on the mural with us. So close to 20 artists all total on this artist team. So I wanted to end up with John Lewis, because not only was it Nina Simone's birthday this weekend, it was John Lewis's birthday. And I found this quote and I was like, oh, I didn't know he said that, because everybody knows about good trouble, necessary trouble. But he did say that without the arts, without music, dance, drama, photography, the civil rights movement would have been like a bird without wings. So that's what I wanted to present to you, but I'm also wanting to show you a book that I'm so proud to be in called Southern Women. And you're gonna laugh when you hear who part of the publishing connection to this book. There's a very successful, very famous magazine called Garden and Gun. And I had second thoughts for a minute about my association with the magazine when I realized, as I looked through it and found out more about it, it's like Southern Living, it's one of those lifestyle magazines, that it really is a representation of where I live. This, you know, these walking contradictions of the land, of hunting, of weapons, of social justice, and all of these things. And if we'd had more time, I would read a section out of it, because I have it with me today with a section about my mom, but I'll save that for later, because it looks like we've come to a good point in the presentation. And then last slide, I'll be talking to you about a call to action. I'm gonna take some time to put something together, but I think this will give you enough to sort of percolate on for a minute. I don't know if there's any questions, but we've gone on a journey.
Yes, we have gone on a journey, and you know, we can maybe tie the call to action to this final question that we have from Casey. Casey asks, can you tell us more about the archive of Afro-Relation art you've mentioned creating?
Oh, wonderful, wonderful,
Thank
Casey.
you, Casey.
Yay.
Right, so talk to us about the archive that you mentioned creating and lead us to that call of action.
Okay, so one of the things that you'll know is, you know, people always wonder, because we live a life of joy, we live a life of creation, you know, what if artists are getting to do all these wonderful things, how do you make a living? You know, and I have been a college professor my entire career. And then there was a point where I stepped away from that, and I was, you know, a practicing artist, and I had to write grants all the time. And there were all these different things that I had to put together in order to be able to, you know, have a consistent paycheck. But I'm also a landowner, and, you know, there are all these things that you do, you know, I'm a good landlord. And so recently I was selected to be the Layman Brady Fellow. And it's, as we said earlier, that's shared between Duke University and the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. The fellowship itself comes out of Duke primarily. They just share me, but it's with the Center for Documentary Studies. So something that I've wanted to do for almost 10 years that I've only done in terms of writing down stories and having a couple of audio interviews. I'm hoping that within the next 6 months, I will have a short documentary that may be actually used as a way to gain funding to turn this into a full-fledged documentary. There's also a series of photographs that I've been working on with a photographer on Appalachia, and there's some interest in having that published. And many of the people that you might even remember, Yolani, from Liberty Baptist Church and places like that. So yes, that's the other thing that we have to do, because even in this time of COVID, I don't know who's on the call or may listen later. Everybody needs to be writing a journal about this time, because it's unlike any other experience that we've had in the history of this country and in the world. And that can be a way for you to not only reflect on your own experience, but to think about creative ways that you might be able to share your experience.
Right. And so with that, Marie, we want to thank you so much for sharing your work.
Thank you.
Your wisdom, and for, again, creating a space for us to think outside of our own communities and take a moment to pause, right, and to reflect. And so thank you so much for being with us. I'm going to turn it over to Kristen, who may have some additional remarks for us before we conclude our event.
Thank you so much, Marie, for bringing us so much hope and vision through your art. And thank you, Yolani, for leading us in a wonderful conversation. I'm grateful for everyone who could be with us. I just wanted to say that we'll be recording this and posting it on the gallery's website. And I encourage everyone to keep in touch with the university galleries about our upcoming programs and future virtual artist talks, which will be posted on our website. So thank you, everyone, for being with us today.
Yes.
Okay. Have a good night, everyone.
All right. And I'll be in touch. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.